So what happened to the Marines? Well, let's go through a combat example, and I think this is a good opportunity to walk through how land combat works. It's pretty traditional as far as land combat mechanics go in war games. There's a CRT and things like that. It's different in other respects, and mainly it's different in the sense that units have these various shifts that apply cumulatively with other shifts like you get for terrain or air superiority or things like that. But let's go ahead and walk through combat, and we'll see how all this works together. Okay, so you'll remember from the last video that we are working on a 2-to-1 odds, and that's because the Soviet forces that have surrounded the Marines have managed to assemble 16 combat strength points for purposes of attacking. They actually have 17 if we include the air mobile unit, but the defending Marines constitute 2 strength points for the battalion, 5 strength points for the brigade, and then the Italian artillery company is a strength point. And that's, of course, all in defense. So we've got a 16, 17 actually, to 8, which gives us a 2-to-1. So a 2-to-1 is not that great of an attack, but you know, it's manageable. And but really, what's going to tip the scales for the Soviets are the various shifts that apply. So among the shifts that that we want to talk about, you'll notice, for instance, this Spetsnaz unit right here. The number in the upper left-hand corner is this unit's shift bonus. The air mobile guy here has a shift of 1, and the other Soviet units have no shifts because these are just line units. They're not elite or anything special. So we've got a 2-to-1, but because of the air mobile unit and because of the Spetsnaz, that's going to bump our 2-to-1 up 3 column shifts, which will make it a 5-to-1. Now, in addition to that, we've got the Soviet air units, as you can see here, and they had participated in air combat. There were no Allied air units to resist the Soviet attack. There was this Marine Cobra regiment. They actually managed to survive air combat and bug out. So that left the Soviets with total air supremacy over the hex. And you'll notice the air units also have shifts. And you can see that the Soviet fighter unit has a shift of 1. This one also has a shift of 1. And even the attack helicopters have a shift of 1. So all together, we've got a shift of 6 for the Soviets. We've got 2 for the Spetsnaz, 1 for the air mobile, and 3 for the combined air units. So that's going to take our 2-to-1 all the way to the maximum column on the CRT, which happens to be 7-to-1. So you can't go any higher than the maximum column on the CRT, which is 7-to-1. So that's where we're at. However, there are defender shifts to consider. And let's take a look at those. In the first place, there is terrain. And this is called hilly terrain. There are no forests and there are no peak terrain features like you might see here. Here's a peak you can kind of see. And those really impose a lot of shifts in favor of the defender. But this is only hills, and that's going to grant the defender a 2-shift leftward bonus. And the Marines themselves, you can see the Marine Battalion has a shift of 1. The Marine Brigade has a shift of 2. And the Italian Artillery Company has a shift of 1. So altogether, we have 6 shifts. Now, when calculating shifts, you take the net result of all positive shifts and all negative shifts. So the total amount of shifts that the Soviets have are 6. We've got the air mobile, we've got the Spetsnaz, and we've got the air units. But of course, also, don't forget that the Soviets are going to benefit from an additional shift because they have managed to surround the Americans, and that's called a surround shift. I called it a concentric bonus earlier, but it means the same thing. So we actually have 7 total shifts. In addition, for this attack, the Soviets are going to use chemical weapons, and that's going to grant them an additional 2 shifts beyond that. So we're actually looking at 9 total shifts. So this is a pretty healthy attack for the Soviets. So we've got 9 total attack shifts against 6 defensive shifts. That's 4 here, plus another 2 for the terrain. So, of course, 6 after 9 minus 6 is 3. That leaves us with a net of 3 column shifts above 2 to 1, which is the odds that we're looking at. So in the end, we have a 5 to 1 result. All right, well, I already rolled the die, and the result was disappointing for the Soviets. We got a roll of 3. And remember, for Soviet land combat attacks, they roll a 10-sided die, whereas the Allies roll 2 6-sided dice. And so a 3 was not that great of a result. And on the CRT, we'll take a look at the CRT here. If you see the 5 to 1 column right along here, you can come down here and you can see that a result of 3 is going to result in a defender withdraw. That's what DW means, defender withdraw. So the Allies here, the Italians and the Marines, have to withdraw from the hex. Now you'll notice that there's nowhere for them to withdraw to because they're backed up against the sea. So this means big trouble for the Allies. However, the rules state a provision that in the event that the defenders are unable to withdraw, they can instead take a loss. And a loss will constitute a substitution for a defender withdraw. So as the Allies, we have to lose one of these units, or we can flip the Marine Brigade. I don't think these have... yeah, there is a depleted side for the Marine Battalion. So take the Italian artillery. It has no depleted side. We really don't want to lose that because that provides us a shift. And the Marine Brigade, if we took a hit with them, turn him around here, we can see that we would still retain a combat strength of 4. And the Marine Battalion, that would take us down to a defense strength of 1. So any way you slice it, we'd be losing a point. But we're going to go ahead and flip the Marine Battalion, and we'll call this the World War III version of Khe-Sanh or something. And there you go. We've got the Marines that took a hit, but the Soviets did not manage to break into that hex, and the Marines are still holding out. Now, I've gone ahead and completed the Allied moves, and you can see the Italians have all moved up and kind of situated themselves on the line here. This is a bad result for the Soviets because the Soviet player really wanted to clear this hex so they could move on and continue to push into Italy. But, you know, you roll a 3, you roll a 3. So, and that's the way it goes. In the end, it could have been worse. I could have rolled a 1, for instance, and I think that would have resulted in an even exchange, which would have meant that the Marines would have taken some losses and the Soviets would have taken losses. So, you know, the Soviet player can be happy that at least in this case, he suffered no losses. He, in effect, has lost a turn. He depleted the Marines, but he lost a turn. Now, this scenario lasts 16 turns, and we're only on turn 4, so it's not the end of the world. It's not the result that the Soviets wanted, but, you know, so goes war. Anyway, all right, there you go. That was the result. The Marines managed to hold on. This allowed the Italians to kind of shore up their front line. as I suggested in the last video, the Italians kind of moved up some of these troops here, and they came down here, and they're now besieging that plucky little Soviet air mobile unit. But the Italians did not quite have enough firepower with what they could get up in this difficult terrain to attack that Soviet air mobile unit, especially because they don't have any air support that they can rely on just now. So this Soviet air mobile unit is safe for the moment. So we will see what happens in the next video. And I said before that I wasn't going to make this into an after-action report, but things keep getting so interesting. I want to find out what happens so we can come to some sort of conclusion here. The other thing to mention is that the Soviet player completed a lot of his airstrikes along the Po Valley periphery, where all the Italian industry is, and that went pretty disastrously. The Soviets managed to get a couple hits, but they lost a ton of air units to SAMs. And SAMs are very effective in this game, at least as far as defending munition targets go. And the Soviets, they just kind of got the short end of the stick. So that was very bad news. The Soviets still have a fair amount of air units, and they got more reinforcements. And the Italian Air Force has been effectively neutralized. I think they got one air unit, and I believe that's it right there. That's it. That's the Italian Air Force after all the fierce combat. So the Russians are going to be allowed to provide ample air support to their units, and that's going to help here in the battle to try to get across the mountains. But the American air units are coming, and that's going to kind of stabilize things again. And so it's really going to kind of come down to who can win out. Can the Americans manage to push back the Red Air Force and kind of solidify the line here, or can the Russians manage to shoot down a couple of F-14s or whatever and then continue their drive? So we'll find out as the next video continues.